Hello, my name is Cole Gomez and I am a graduate student at Ball State University. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the prompt hierarchy and what you need to know to be successful when working directly with your clients. To start off, it's important that we define what is a prompt hierarchy. A prompt hierarchy is the order and varying support levels that are utilized by a therapist to get a client to elicit the correct response. The prompt hierarchy can be broken down into 6 main prompts, including independent prompts, visual, verbal, gestural, modeling, and physical. As we continue through this training, we will discuss each prompt level and how to properly implement it. You might be wondering, why is prompting important? Prompting is a common and important strategy that is utilized in applied behavioral analysis. Prompting helps increase rate of responding, lower frustration, and increase efficiency of learning. The prompt hierarchy can be utilized in 2 ways, including least to most prompting or most to least prompting, and this will always be denoted by the BCBA. Both strategies have benefits for being utilized and will be discussed in the next 2 slides. Starting with least to most prompting, I have provided a visual depiction of what this looks like. Least to most prompting moves down the prompting hierarchy pyramid, as you can see in this image, starting with the least intrusive prompt all the way to the most intrusive prompt. According to Libby et al. 2008, least to most prompting allows for the learner to respond independently while providing the least intrusive prompt if needed. Additionally, least to most prompting is a preferable approach for learners that tend to show quick skill acquisition. On this side, we have a depiction of what most to least prompting looks like. Most to least prompting works up the prompt hierarchy pyramid, starting with the most intrusive prompt and moves to the least intrusive prompt. Again, in a study by Libby et al. 2008, this form of prompting procedure was associated with fewer errors per session. Most to least prompting is also considered to be the preferred technique when you are unsure about a client's learning history. Lastly, most to least prompting should be implemented when errors may evoke target behaviors or hinder the client's ability to learn. For the purposes of this training module, we will be talking about each prompt in order it would occur using a least to most prompting technique. Starting with an independent prompt, the behavior technician will provide the discriminative stimulus, SD, followed by a period of waiting for the client to respond. Typically, this period lasts roughly for a 3-second interval before an additional prompt is used. However, if a client is suspected to have an auditory processing disorder or delay, your response time may be increased to more of a 5 to 10 second interval. This is to promote independent responding. If the client responds within the allotted time and the answer is correct, this would be independent. An example of this would be when a BT says, "What do you want?" The client will respond within the 3 to 10 seconds, "I want the ball," and therefore would be marked independent. Next is a visual prompt. According to Chicago ABA Therapy, a visual prompt is a picture or cue that is provided to the client to elicit the correct response. Some examples of visual prompts include visual schedules, photos, drawings, flashcards, etc. An example of using a visual prompt is when a client is learning their address. The BT says, "What's your address?" and presents a piece of paper with the address on it. The client then repeats the address that is written on the piece of paper. Here, we will discuss verbal prompts. Verbal prompts can be further broken down into 2 subcategories, direct and indirect. According to the Nevada Dual Sensory Impairment Project, a direct verbal prompt is demonstrated by providing a verbal instruction on what to do after initially waiting 3 to 10 seconds for the client to respond and no response is given. Direct verbal prompts can also be paired with a gesture. An example of this would be, after an initial SD, "What do you eat with?" and the client does not respond, the BT says, "You eat with a spoon," and they may pair that by pointing to the spoon. Additionally, an indirect prompt is demonstrated similarly to a direct verbal prompt. However, instead of providing the learner with verbal instruction, the BT will simply repeat the question after the initial waiting period without the client providing the independent response. This form of verbal prompt can be paired with a gesture as well. An example of this would be after the initial SD, "What do you want?" and the client does not respond, the BT will repeat the question, "What do you want?" and they may pair that by pointing to the preferred object. Okay, so after briefly mentioning the term gesture in the previous slide, it is important that we also discuss what this is and what this looks like, because gestures itself can be used independently of any other type of prompt level. A gestural prompt consists of pointing in the direction of a response or item you wish the learner to perform in order to elicit the correct response. Of course, just like other prompts, this is completed after initially using an independent prompt and the response was not provided. An example of a gestural prompt is when the BT says, "Give me the ball," and a response is not provided within that 3 to 10 seconds. The BT will then provide a gesture by pointing to the ball in the absence of repeating the verbal instruction. Moving into a model prompt, this consists of providing the action or response expected of the learner to then imitate. This form of prompt can also be paired with a direct verbal prompt. An example of what this looks like is when a BT says, "Touch your nose," and the response is not provided within the 3 to 10 seconds of the initial SD. The BT will then model the behavior of touching their nose, and the client imitates that action of then touching their nose. Our last level of the prompt hierarchy consists of our most intrusive prompt, which is the physical prompt. Just like our verbal prompt, physical prompt can be divided into two subcategories, partial physical and full physical. Partial physical prompting is demonstrated by initiating the client to respond by providing forearm guidance in the direction where a response should be provided or completed, and then allowing the client or the learner to finish out the action. This prompt can also be paired with a direct verbal prompt. An example of a partial physical prompt is when a BT says, "Arms up." Client does not respond within that 3 to 10 seconds of the initial SD. The BT may repeat this instruction, arms up, and then provide forearm guidance of the client's arm in an upwards direction, which in turn cues the learner to finish the remainder of the action. A full physical prompt is demonstrated when providing hand-over-hand guidance to complete an entire response that is expected by the learner. This prompt can also be paired with a direct verbal prompt. An example of this would be when a BT says, "Arms up." A client does not respond within the 3 to 10 seconds of that initial SD. The BT may repeat the instruction, "Arms up," and hand over hand guide the client's arms in an upward direction to complete the entire action. Something that can occur when implementing prompts during teaching instruction is something called prompt dependency. Prompt dependency is when a learner relies on a specific prompt or cue in order to complete a task at hand. This occurs when the same prompt is used repeatedly and is not varied, or when prompts are not faded properly. EdWad 2023 offers a few tips to help avoid prompt dependency, including fading prompts quickly, relying on the least intrusive prompt when possible, and also varying the prompt so that they are not occurring in the same order. An example of how to vary your prompts is provided on the next slide. It is important to note whether or not you are using least to most prompting or most to least prompting. Additionally, you will want to stick to the order specified within each of these terms of ascending or descending the prompting hierarchy. For example, in least to most prompting, and this may not look the same every time, but just to give an example of what this might look like, trial 1 would start with independent, model, and then followed up with a full physical prompt. Trial 2 may look like a gesture, a model, and then a partial physical prompt, whereas trial 3 may look like a model, a partial physical, or a full physical, and these can be used interchangeably as long as you're keeping with the order of the least to most prompting. Most to least prompting in trial 1 can look like full physical down to a partial physical to a gesture. Trial 2 could look like a model to a gesture to an independent prompt, and trial 3 can start with a partial physical prompt, a model prompt, followed up by a verbal prompt. Thank you for listening to this training presentation. If you have any questions about anything in this video, please feel free to talk to myself or your supervising BCBAs. Have a great day.